The first morning at the elite school felt too quiet for Ethan. The foster kid who had never owned anything new in his life. His shoes were secondhand, his uniform slightly too big, and the backpack he carried had a broken zipper that he tried to hide with tape. When he stepped through the tall glass doors, he could feel every pair of eyes turning toward him. The other students looked polished, rich, and perfect. Their laughter sounded confident. Their shoes clicked against the marble floors, and their perfume filled the air. Ethan walked slower, feeling smaller with every step. He didn't belong here, not in this place where everyone's last name seemed to mean something. But he had earned his way through a scholarship, one that said talent-based admission. Still, to him it felt like a label that screamed, "You don't belong." He reached his locker and saw his reflection in the shiny metal door. A tired face, messy hair, but in his eyes there was something strong, something that had survived worse than whispers. In class, the teacher greeted him politely, but there was that tone, the kind that people use when they think they're being kind but are secretly judging. "Welcome, Ethan," she said. "We're happy to have such a special student." Some kids giggled. Ethan smiled back even though he wanted to disappear. During introductions, each student mentioned their father's company or their mother's title. When it was Ethan's turn, he just said, "I like music." The room went quiet for a moment before someone whispered, "Of course you do, everyone likes music." And laughter spread like static through the air. When lunchtime came, Ethan sat alone at the far end of the cafeteria. He unpacked a small sandwich wrapped in paper, while others ordered hot meals that came on silver trays. A group of boys from his class sat nearby, their voices loud enough for him to hear. "That's the foster kid, right?" One said. "He got in for free, probably some charity case." Another added, "He'll quit in a week." Ethan lowered his head and took a small bite of his sandwich, pretending not to hear. The only time he felt peace was when he passed the music room. It was large and bright, with polished floors and a grand piano that stood like a king in the center. The sight of it made his chest tighten. He had never seen one so perfect back in the foster home. The piano was old, missing keys and always slightly out of tune, but he used to play it every night until the caretaker told him to stop. Here the piano seemed like a dream he could touch. He lingered near the door, watching a group of students practice a duet, their fingers moving effortlessly, their laughter confident. One of them noticed him and smirked. "You can't just walk in here," she said. "This room's for competition players only." Ethan nodded. Backing away slowly, her voice followed him down the hall. "Don't scratch the floor with those cheap shoes." That night, when Ethan returned to the small room the school gave him in the dormitory, he sat on the edge of his bed and stared at his hands. They were calloused, rough from years of helping clean at the foster home, but those same hands had also played melodies that made younger kids fall asleep. He looked out the window where the city lights sparkled like distant stars and whispered to himself, "I'll play again." His voice was small but certain. He didn't have friends, fancy clothes, or a family cheering for him, but he had something the others didn't: the need to prove he was more than what they saw. He remembered the old piano at the foster home, how every broken note taught him patience, how every time he fixed a key with tape, it taught him to adapt. He carried that same strength now, hidden under his quiet face the next day. As he walked through the hallway again, the whispers didn't sting as much. He was getting used to them. The rich kids could keep their laughter, their shiny shoes, their polished confidence. Ethan had something they couldn't buy: hunger. The kind that makes you work harder when everyone expects you to fail. He passed the music room once more. The piano gleamed in the morning sun. This time he didn't turn away. He stepped inside quietly and pressed a single key. The sound was soft, pure, and it made his heart tremble. The janitor walking by paused and smiled at him. "You play?" the man asked. Ethan nodded shyly. "A little," the janitor winked. "Then play, kid." "Music doesn't care who your parents are." Ethan sat down, his fingers uncertain at first, then stronger. He began to play that same lullaby from the foster home, the one that always made the children smile before sleeping. The sound filled the empty room and drifted into the hallway. A few students stopped to listen, confused that the quiet foster kid could make something so beautiful. For the first time since arriving, Ethan didn't care who was watching. The music felt like home, and that was enough. The next morning, Ethan walked into the music room again, his heart steady but heavy. He had barely slept, the sound of that single note from yesterday still echoing in his mind like a promise. Today the music class was full, students chatting, laughing, showing off new sheet music printed on crisp paper, their instruments shining under the soft light. When Ethan entered, the laughter faded for a moment. then turned into quiet whispers. The instructor, Mr. Callow, was tall and polished, with silver hair and a suit that smelled faintly of cologne and power. "Ah, our scholarship student," he said with a tight smile. "Welcome back." Ethan nodded, unsure whether to sit or stand. Mr. Callow gestured toward the far corner where an old upright piano stood, dull and scarred, unlike the grand one the others used. "You'll use that one," the teacher said. "It's better suited to your experience," the class chuckled, and Ethan felt a familiar sting rise in his chest. He sat down, running his fingers over the rough wooden edge of the piano. A few of the keys were chipped. One didn't move at all. He pressed it gently and heard nothing. A dead sound. He smiled anyway, pretending it didn't matter. Music was still music. Even if the instrument was broken, Mr. Callow started the lesson, assigning each student a piece to practice for the upcoming spring competition. "Technique first," he said, pacing across the room. "Emotion second." When it was Ethan's turn, the teacher stopped beside him. "Show us what you've got," he said. Ethan hesitated, then placed his fingers on the keys and began to play a simple tune, one he had learned years ago on the battered piano at the foster home. The melody was soft, built from memory, each note uncertain but heartfelt. A few students giggled at the simplicity. "That's cute," whispered one of them. "Doesn't he know anything else?" Ethan kept playing, focusing on the rhythm, trying not to notice the laughter, but his hands trembled slightly, making one note ring sharp and wrong. The class burst into quiet snickers. When the song ended, silence followed. Mr. Callow clapped slowly, his voice calm but sharp. "That was quaint. But for this school, you'll need something more advanced, something worthy of performance." He turned to the others. "Perhaps someone can show him how it's done immediately." Lucas stood, tall and confident, his fingers already poised. He played a complex piece full of speed and flair. Glancing at Ethan between chords, the crowd loved it. When the final note thundered through the room, they clapped wildly. Lucas smirked. "Maybe next time." Kid Ethan smiled faintly, pretending he didn't care. But inside, the humiliation burned after class. As the others packed their instruments, he stayed behind, pressing the dead key again and again, trying to make it move. The janitor from yesterday appeared in the doorway, leaning on his broom. "Broken key?" he asked. Ethan nodded. "Yeah, it's dead." The man chuckled. "Everything's got life in it if you know where to tap." He knelt, tapped the side gently with a wrench, and the key sprang back up with a soft click. "See? Old things just need patience." Ethan grinned for the first time that day. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Don't thank me," the janitor said. "Thank yourself when you make that piano sing." Later that week, the competition posters went up, bold letters spelling out Spring Music Championship. The prize was a scholarship extension and a feature in a local newspaper. The students buzzed with excitement. But when Ethan walked by, Lucas called out, "Hey, you're joining too, right? Maybe you can play that lullaby again." People love bedtime stories, the group laughed. Ethan kept walking, pretending not to hear, though deep down, he had already decided. He would play, he would enter, even if his piano was old, even if no one believed in him. Every night after dinner, he returned to the music room, the lights dim, the air cool, the piano waiting. Sometimes the janitor passed by and nodded, leaving him to his world. Ethan practiced until his fingers ached, his back sore, his eyes tired. He replayed every mistake from class, fixing it, smoothing it, building a sound that was his own. He didn't have perfect technique, but he had emotion, and that was something they couldn't teach. One evening, as he was finishing, he noticed faint footprints near the window, small, like someone had been watching. The next day, he caught sight of a girl with dark hair sitting by the door, sketching in her notebook. When he looked up, she smiled shyly. "You play beautifully," she said. Ethan was startled. "I thought everyone laughed." She shook her head. "Not everyone." Her name was Mia, and she was one of the quieter students. Often overlooked like him, she stayed late too, painting while he practiced, sometimes offering to turn pages for him for the first time. Ethan didn't feel completely alone when he played. It wasn't just for himself anymore, it was for the music. For the janitor who believed in him, for Mia who listened quietly, and maybe even for the kids back at the foster home. He didn't realize it yet, but this small, broken piano would soon become the center of something bigger than any of them imagined, something that would make the whole school stop laughing and start listening. A week later, the posters for the music competition decorated every hallway. The rich students treated it like a festival, showing off their suits, pieces, and family connections. But for Ethan, it was something else entirely. This was his only chance to prove that he wasn't a charity case, that the foster kid didn't just belong, he could win. When he went to the music room that morning, something felt off. The grand piano was gone, rolled out to the auditorium for the finalists' practice. In its place stood the same old upright piano, scratched, dusty, and covered with a sheet. Mr. Callow looked up from his clipboard. "Ethan, you'll be performing on this one during the preliminary round," he said casually. "We can't risk you damaging the main stage piano." The other students snickered. Ethan forced a smile. "That's fine, sir." But deep down he felt the sting. As soon as class ended, he sat at the old piano to test it, pressing the keys softly. Something was wrong. The notes were uneven, some flat, some sharp. One of the pedals didn't work at all. He pressed harder, trying to tune it by ear, but nothing changed. Then he noticed faint scratch marks on the lid. Someone had tampered with it. Later, Lucas passed by with two of his friends, pretending to stretch. "You practicing on that antique?" he said. "Might as well bring a toy keyboard." Ethan stayed quiet. But when they left, he lifted the top cover and saw it. A few strings inside had been slightly loosened. One key was jammed with gum. His stomach dropped. It wasn't random wear, it was a setup. They had rigged it to humiliate him. That night, he stayed behind after everyone left. The janitor, Mr. Howard, found him crouched beside the piano with a screwdriver. "You fixing that thing again?" he asked. Ethan nodded. "It's not working right," the man sighed, kneeling beside him. "You know, some people break things just to see if you'll quit trying to fix them." Ethan smiled faintly. "Then I guess I'll keep fixing, hour after hour." He cleaned, tightened, and tested every key. He didn't have tools, just an old screwdriver, paper clips and tape when his fingers bled. He wrapped them with tissue when his eyes burned. He closed them and listened instead. The sound wasn't perfect, but he could feel it improving. The piano was fighting with him, but also for him. Every small sound became a heartbeat. A breath. Days passed and rumors spread around the school. "The foster kid's still trying to fix that trash piano," they said. "He's going to embarrass himself." Ethan heard it all. But he didn't stop. Mia sometimes brought him sandwiches, sitting quietly nearby as he worked. "You could tell the teacher," she said one night. "They cheated." Ethan shook his head. "If I win, I want to win because of me, not because someone got caught." By the end of the week, he had tuned most of the keys back into place. The pedal was still broken, but he found a trick, by adjusting his timing. He could control the sound without it. When he finally played a full piece, the notes came alive again, not perfect, but beautiful in their own uneven way. Mr. Howard clapped softly from the doorway. "You made that thing sing again," he said, smiling. "They gave you a broken voice, kid, but you taught it how to speak." The morning of the competition arrived. Ethan woke early, his hands shaking slightly. He didn't have a fancy suit, just a clean shirt and old black pants that barely fit. As he walked through the school hall, heads turned, not with kindness, but with curiosity. No one expected him to show up, not after what they'd done. When he stepped onto the stage for the sound test, Lucas whispered to a friend, "Watch this disaster." Ethan ignored them, sat down and closed his eyes. The room went quiet. He pressed the first note. It came out clear, deep, then another and another. Each sound stronger than the last. As he played, something changed in the air. People stopped talking, stopped smirking. The broken piano sang, rough but alive, like it had something to say when he finished. Even the teacher looked surprised. "Impressive control," Mr. Callow muttered. Pretending not to be impressed, Ethan smiled slightly, not out of pride but relief. He had taken what they meant for mockery and turned it into music. As he walked off the stage, Mia whispered from the corner, "They thought they'd humiliate you." He looked at her and said softly, "They just helped me write my song." That night, while everyone else went home, Ethan returned to the music room one last time. He placed his hand on the piano and whispered, "Tomorrow, we show them what broken really sounds like." The lights flickered. The air was still, and in that quiet room, the old piano seemed to hum back, ready, just like him, ready to fight, ready to sing. The morning of the competition was heavy with tension. Clouds rolled over the academy roof and the air smelled of polished wood and nerves. Ethan woke early, long before the alarm. He stared at his reflection in the small dorm mirror, adjusting his collar again and again. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from something deeper, determination. Today wasn't about showing off. It was about surviving the laughter and turning it into silence, the kind that comes after real music. When he arrived at the auditorium, it was already buzzing with excitement. Parents in elegant clothes, cameras flashing, teachers whispering about which student would impress the sponsors. Lucas stood near the stage in a tailored suit, laughing with his friends, his confidence thick in the air. When he saw Ethan, his smirk widened. "Didn't expect you to actually show up," he said. "Hope your toy piano holds together." Ethan just nodded, his calmness confusing everyone. He walked past them without a word, carrying only a small folded piece of sheet music in his pocket, a melody he had written himself. The stage looked enormous, bright lights shining down on a line of perfect instruments. Every performer had their name engraved on a polished plaque except for Ethan. His slot was just marked guest performer, scholarship student. He stood beside his old upright piano, now cleaned but still dull beside the grand instruments. It looked like a relic in a hall of gold, but to Ethan it felt alive. It was his friend, his weapon, his story. As the competition began, the other students performed flawlessly, one after another. Pieces filled the room with practiced precision. The judges nodded politely but rarely smiled. Everything sounded the same, perfect but empty. Mia sat in the crowd, clutching the edge of her seat, waiting. When Ethan's name was finally called, a soft murmur rippled through the audience. Some whispered, "That's the foster kid." Others laughed quietly. This should be interesting. Ethan took a slow breath and stepped into the spotlight. He sat down, the piano keys cool beneath his fingertips. For a brief second he felt the old fear creeping back. The whispers, the taunts, the broken notes. Then he remembered Mr. Howard's words. "They gave you a broken voice, but you taught it how to speak." He smiled faintly, pressed the first key and let the sound rise. The first few notes trembled, uneven, the piano's flaws showing. A few people chuckled, but Ethan didn't stop. Instead, he adapted, letting the broken sounds blend into the rhythm. He shifted his style, weaving the imperfections into something haunting and beautiful. The melody began to bloom, slow, emotional, raw. It wasn't the polished sound of wealth. It was the cry of someone who had fought to be heard. Each note carried a piece of him, his loneliness, his hunger, his hope. The judges leaned forward, one of them lowering her pen. Lucas's smile faded, the laughter stopped. The piano, despite its scars, filled the auditorium with warmth and honesty. It was a song that didn't need perfection. It needed truth. Ethan closed his eyes, his hands moving faster now, improvising, turning the broken pedal into rhythm, the damaged strings into heartbeats. He played like a storm, not of chaos, but of release. Every sound echoed off the high ceiling, resonating through the people who once doubted him. Then came the silence, that sacred kind that happens only when the music takes hold of everyone at once. Ethan lifted his fingers slowly, the last note hanging in the air, fragile yet powerful. For a long moment, no one moved. Then a single clap broke the stillness, followed by another and another until the hall erupted in applause. The standing ovation rolled through the room like thunder. Ethan stood, breathing hard, unsure whether to bow or run. Tears burned at the corners of his eyes. He looked toward the crowd and saw Mia clapping the hardest, her eyes shining. He saw Mr. Howard near the side door, smiling proudly. Even the principal wiped a tear from her cheek. Lucas sat frozen, his hands still on his knees, his face pale with disbelief. When Ethan finally walked off the stage, Mr. Callow met him at the steps, his voice softer now. "That was unexpected," he said. "You turned imperfection into art." Ethan nodded politely, "Thank you, sir," and continued walking. He didn't need validation anymore. He had already won something bigger than a trophy. Backstage, Mia rushed to him. "You did it," she said. "They'll never forget that." Ethan smiled. "I didn't do it to prove them wrong," he said quietly. "I did it to prove I was right." She didn't quite understand. But she hugged him anyway, and for the first time, he let someone hold him without feeling small. That night, when everyone had left, Ethan returned to the empty hall. He stood beside the old piano once more, the spotlight long gone, only the moonlight touching the keys. He pressed one note soft and clear. It echoed through the silence. He whispered, "We did it." And for a second it felt like the piano whispered back, a broken instrument that had carried a broken boy. And together, they made something whole. The next morning, sunlight poured through the dorm window and painted golden lines across Ethan's room. The world outside had changed. Though he didn't realize it yet, he sat quietly on the bed, replaying the night in his mind. The applause, the silence before it. The way the air had trembled with sound and emotion. It didn't feel real. Part of him still thought it had been a dream. But when he looked at his hands, the faint bruises on his knuckles reminded him that it was real. It had happened. The broken piano had sung, and the world had listened. By the time he stepped into the school hallway, whispers followed him again, but they were different now. They weren't mocking, they were curious, respectful, almost amazed. "That's him," someone said softly. "The scholarship kid who played last night," another whispered. "I didn't even know that piano could sound like that." It was strange. The same people who once smirked at him now looked at him like he had done something impossible. But Ethan kept his head down. He didn't walk faster. Didn't smile wider. Inside he was calm because deep down he knew. One performance doesn't change who you are. It only reveals it. When he reached the music room, the old piano sat in its corner like a veteran after battle. A few strings still loose, the wood scratched. But there was something noble about it now, like it carried scars that meant something. Mr. Callow was already there, standing beside Lucas. The teacher's tone was serious. "Lucas, you played well, but Ethan's performance, it was exceptional." Lucas's jaw tightened. "He just got lucky, sir." Mr. Callow shook his head. "Luck doesn't move a room to tears." Then his eyes met Ethan's. "I want you to prepare your piece again for the city finals. You've been selected to represent the academy." Ethan froze. He wasn't sure he heard right. "Me?" he asked softly. Mr. Callow nodded. "You? And the same piano. Apparently it's become something of a symbol." The room went silent. Lucas looked like he had swallowed glass. "You're letting him represent us?" he said bitterly, "on that junk." But the teacher didn't respond. He simply placed a folder on the piano and walked away, leaving the tension thick and unspoken. When everyone left, Ethan sat down and opened the folder. Inside was the program for the city competition, the biggest event in the district, where students from every elite school competed for scholarships and national recognition. His stomach twisted with nerves, but then he remembered the applause, the faces that had changed last night. And most of all, the way the music had felt, free, honest, alive that afternoon. He began to practice again, but this time it was different. There was no anger, no need to prove anything. It was just him and the sound. The janitor, Mr. Howard, walked in as usual, carrying a mop and a small grin. "Heard you made him cry," he said. Ethan laughed softly. "Maybe the piano did," the old man nodded. "Maybe. But I think it was the hands guiding it." He placed a small tool set beside Ethan. "Found this in storage, figured you could use it. Treat that piano right before you take it to the big stage." For the next week, Ethan worked harder than ever, fixing the piano every night and playing until his fingers numbed. Mia visited when she could, sketching the old piano for her art project. "You know," she said once, "I think this thing's part of you now." Ethan smiled. "Yeah, maybe it is," he replied. But not everyone was happy. One evening, as Ethan left the hall, he overheard Lucas talking to his friends. "I'm not letting him humiliate this school on TV," he muttered. "If he thinks he's walking in there with that scrap pile, he's got another thing coming." Ethan didn't say anything, but a small chill ran down his spine. He knew Lucas wasn't done trying to sabotage him. 3 days before the finals, disaster struck. Ethan walked into the music room early and stopped cold. The piano was ruined again. The lid cracked. One leg snapped. Strings ripped out like veins. For a moment he couldn't breathe. He touched the broken wood with trembling hands. All his hard work gone, he sank to the floor. Staring in silence, his heart hollow, Mr. Howard found him there, his expression darkening when he saw the damage. "They did this?" he asked quietly. Ethan nodded, unable to speak. The janitor sighed deeply. "Kids, sometimes life smashes what you build, just to see if you'll rebuild it stronger." Ethan swallowed hard. "But it's too broken this time." The man placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then make the broken part of your music." That night, Ethan didn't sleep. He sat in the dark auditorium staring at the shattered piano, the moonlight glinting off its broken frame. Then slowly he stood, wiped his tears, and began to gather the pieces. Screws, strings, wood splinters, all of it. He stayed up the entire night, tightening, taping, bending, building something new. Not perfect, but his. When the first rays of dawn touched the floor, he pressed a key. The sound was faint but alive, and he smiled. The finals were in 2 days. The piano wasn't whole, and neither was he. But somehow both were ready together again, broken, but ready to make the world listen one more time. The morning of the city finals arrived cold and gray, the kind of sky that made everything look sharp and unreal. Ethan stood outside the academy bus, holding the piano cover in his arms like a blanket. The old instrument had been patched up again, its legs reinforced with steel rods, its wood sanded smooth in some places and splintered in others. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive, it was his. As the bus rumbled down the road toward the city auditorium, Ethan watched raindrops race across the window and thought of every step that had brought him here. Every insult, every broken string, every note that refused to die. The auditorium was huge, filled with polished marble and banners from every top school in the region. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with competition. Students tuned their violins, teachers gave last-minute pep talks, and cameras flashed from the press section. Ethan stepped off the bus and felt dozens of eyes turn toward him. They saw the patched piano being wheeled behind him. Some of them laughed, others whispered, "That's the foster kid from St. Augustine Academy, he's actually performing on that." Ethan ignored them, his jaw tight but his eyes calm. Lucas was already there, representing the same school in a different category. When he saw Ethan, he smirked coldly. "I see your trash survived the trip," he said. Ethan didn't answer, but Mia, standing beside the piano, glared at Lucas. "At least it's honest," she said quietly. Lucas laughed and turned away, but his hands clenched at his sides. Backstage, Ethan sat alone for a moment, breathing slowly, the sound of music from the stage filling the air like distant thunder. Every performer before him was perfect, clean, technical, robotic, the kind of playing that impressed judges but never moved hearts. When an assistant came to fetch him, he stood, wiped his palms on his pants, and whispered to himself, "This isn't about winning, it's about speaking." When he stepped onto the stage, the audience murmured. The piano looked so out of place beside the grand chandeliers and shining instruments. One of the judges raised an eyebrow. Another whispered something to her colleague, but Ethan didn't look at them. He bowed slightly and sat down, his fingers resting gently on the keys. He could feel the cracks beneath his fingertips, the rough edges of a piano that had been through everything he had. He took one deep breath and began to play. The first note wavered, soft but full. It wasn't perfect, and that made it human. Then came the next and the next, each one flowing into the other like a heartbeat. Slow, deliberate, emotional. He wasn't playing for applause this time. He was telling a story, the story of a boy who had been given a broken voice and learned to make it sing. The melody rose and fell like the tide, carrying with it all the nights he had spent alone, all the times he'd been mocked, all the quiet strength that had grown inside him when no one was watching. Halfway through, the pedal snapped. A soft crack echoed through the hall. A few people gasped. Lucas grinned from the audience. But Ethan didn't stop. Instead, he changed rhythm mid-piece, letting the flaw become part of the music. His left hand took over where the pedal had failed. His right hand danced faster, sharper, bending the melody to his will. It was no longer a song. It was defiance turned into sound. The judges leaned forward, the audience leaned in closer. The piano groaned and sang at once, every note bleeding emotion. Even the broken strings added texture, a haunting echo that no perfect instrument could have produced. Tears welled in Mia's eyes as she watched from the side, whispering, "Come on, Ethan, show them." He reached the climax. A sudden surge of passion, his fingers flying across the keys, his head bowed, sweat rolling down his temple. The music filled the hall like a wave crashing through marble and pride. When the final note came, it was barely a whisper, fragile, trembling, but beautiful. For a long moment there was silence, not the silence of politeness, but the deep, heavy stillness that comes when hearts are caught off guard. Then slowly one judge began to clap, then another and another, until the whole auditorium erupted in applause. A standing ovation thundered through the hall. Ethan stood, breathing hard, his chest rising and falling, his hands shaking not from fear but from release. He looked at the audience, at the people who once would have laughed, and saw them crying instead. Mr. Callow, who sat among the teachers, had tears in his eyes. Even Lucas looked pale, unable to clap, unable to look away. When Ethan walked off the stage, Mia ran to him, hugging him tight. "You did it," she said breathlessly. "You made them feel it." Ethan smiled. "It wasn't me," he said quietly. "It was the piano. It knew how to speak." She laughed through tears. "Then you were its voice." Later, as the judges announced the results, Ethan didn't care about the trophy, but when they called his name as the winner, He froze. The audience rose again, cheering. His heart pounded as he looked at the piano waiting silently under the lights. And for the first time, he felt it. Not victory, but peace. The kind that only comes when you've turned every broken thing in your life into something that sings. That night, the city auditorium glowed under bright lights, and reporters swarmed around the entrance like bees to honey. Ethan stood backstage, clutching the small golden trophy in his hands. It felt unreal, light, almost fragile, as if it could vanish any second. Cameras flashed as the announcer repeated his name again. Ethan Gray, winner of the City Music Finals. The crowd cheered, but inside he felt strangely quiet. Not the wild happiness he had imagined, more like relief. The kind that comes after a storm finally ends. As he stepped into the spotlight to accept his award, he could see faces everywhere. Teachers, judges, strangers, even Lucas in the back row, arms crossed but eyes lowered for a moment. Ethan remembered the first day he'd walked into this school with his patched-up backpack and second-hand shoes. The same people who once whispered behind his back were now standing, clapping, some even wiping away tears. The applause washed over him like rain, and for the first time in his life, he didn't feel invisible. When the ceremony ended, the head judge, an elderly woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, approached him backstage. "That performance," she said softly. "It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. That's what music is meant to be." "Young man." Ethan bowed slightly, unsure what to say. "Thank you," he murmured. She smiled, placing her hand gently on his shoulder. "Keep playing from that place, and you'll never go unheard again." Outside the hall, the world seemed to open for him. Students from other schools surrounded him, shaking his hand, asking for photos. One boy said, "You played like it came from your heart, not from a book." Another whispered, "You gave us courage." Ethan smiled politely, a little overwhelmed. He wasn't used to this kind of attention. Mr. Callow joined him with a proud but awkward smile. "I underestimated you, Ethan," he admitted. "You reminded us why we teach music in the first place." Ethan nodded, unsure if it was forgiveness or just understanding passing between them. Mia appeared beside him, holding her sketchbook close. "They're saying your performance is already online," she said with a grin. "It's going viral." "Ethan," he blinked in surprise. "Viral?" She nodded. "A reporter uploaded the clip. People are sharing it everywhere. They're calling you the boy who played the broken piano." He laughed softly, shaking his head. "That's ridiculous," she smiled. "Maybe, but it's true." By the next morning, his face was everywhere and on the school bulletin board, on local news, even on a few online articles. "Foster teen wins hearts with broken piano," the headlines read. Reporters came to the academy, asking for interviews. Sponsors called. Music schools reached out. Everyone suddenly wanted to be part of his story, but Ethan stayed quiet through it all. When people asked for advice, he just said, "Play for something real," because that's all he had ever done. Lucas, on the other hand, couldn't hide from the change. His reputation had cracked like glass. The arrogance that once surrounded him was gone, replaced by something hollow. One afternoon, as Ethan was leaving class, Lucas stopped him in the hallway, his voice low and uneasy. "I shouldn't have messed with you," he said quietly. "You didn't deserve it." Ethan looked at him for a long second, then said simply, "You taught me something." Lucas frowned. "What's that?" Ethan smiled faintly. "Sometimes people try to break what they envy." He didn't say it cruelly, just truthfully, and walked away, leaving Lucas standing there with his guilt. Weeks passed and the academy changed too. The teachers stopped treating Ethan like a charity case. Students greeted him in the halls. And the old piano, the same one that had once been hidden in the corner, was moved to the center of the music room, cleaned, polished, and given a plaque that read, "The Heart of St. Augustine's, proof that broken can still sing." Ethan stared at it the day they unveiled it. His chest tight with emotion, Mia stood beside him whispering, "You gave this place a soul." But Ethan didn't stay long in the spotlight. Fame never interested him. After the final press interview, he quietly returned to the foster home where everything had started. The same peeling walls, the same creaky floorboards, the same dusty old piano sitting in the corner. When the children saw him, they ran to him shouting his name. "Ethan, you were on TV," they said. His smile softened. "Yeah, but this," he said, pointing at the piano. "This is where the real music lives." That night, he played for them. Soft lullabies and happy songs, the kind that carried warmth more than perfection. The little ones fell asleep near the floor, and the older ones just watched him, eyes full of quiet admiration when he finished. He looked around at the familiar faces and whispered to himself, "They gave me a broken piano to mock me, but maybe it was never broken. Maybe it was just waiting for someone who knew how to listen." Outside, the wind rustled through the old window, carrying his music into the night. No cameras, no trophies, no applause, just truth, raw and beautiful, the kind of truth that never fades. And that's how the boy who once had nothing became something far greater. A voice that taught the world that even broken things can make the most beautiful sound. Years later, people still spoke about that night. The night a foster kid with a broken piano silenced a room full of doubters. But by then, Ethan had changed. Fame had come and gone like a passing storm. His name had become a quiet legend whispered in music schools, not because he sought fame, but because he disappeared from it. He had chosen a different path, one that no spotlight could follow. He now lived far from the city, in a small coastal town where the mornings smelled of salt and rain. His home was simple, a wooden cottage with wide windows that opened toward the sea, and in the corner of that cottage sat an old piano, the same one from the competition, repaired but still bearing its scars, its keys slightly uneven, its sound perfectly imperfect. The people of the town called it the heart piano, because every time Ethan played it, even the waves seemed to listen. One afternoon, a group of children gathered outside his porch, curious, clutching notebooks and pencils. "Mr. Ethan," one of them asked shyly, "are you really the boy from that video?" He smiled softly. "Maybe," he said, "but I'm not that boy anymore." Their faces fell in disappointment until he continued, "But I still play. Want to learn how?" Their eyes lit up, and that's how it began. Ethan became their teacher, not of theory or fame, but of feeling. He taught them how to find rhythm in footsteps, melody in laughter, music in silence. Anyone can play the notes, he told them, but only your heart can make them sing. The local community hall soon filled every evening with the sound of children learning on mismatched instruments, violins missing strings, guitars with worn frets, and a piano that sounded like memory. Parents who once couldn't afford lessons came to listen, sometimes bringing food, sometimes just gratitude. One evening, as he watched the children perform their first recital, Ethan felt a warmth that no applause could match. When the smallest girl finished her shaky song, she ran to him and whispered, "I played on the broken key. But it still sounded nice," he smiled. "That's because broken things can still be beautiful." Meanwhile, far away in the city, a music foundation was being built, one that aimed to give underprivileged kids instruments and lessons. The founder, Mia, now a well-known artist who named it the Ethan Gray Project, she had never forgotten the boy who played his truth. Every year she sent him letters, updates about the children they helped, and every year he wrote back the same line, "Keep teaching them to feel, not just to play." One winter morning, the sea was rough and the wind howled like an old song. Ethan sat at his piano, his hands trembling slightly from age. He pressed a few notes, soft and slow. The melody that had once changed his life flowed again, imperfect but alive. A knock came at the door. When he opened it, a young reporter stood there, rain dripping from her coat. "Mr. Gray," she said, "I'm writing an article about people who changed music. May I ask, how did it all start?" Ethan looked at her for a moment, his eyes thoughtful. "It started with laughter," he said quietly, "and a piano that everyone thought was worthless." She blinked. "And how did it end?" He smiled faintly. "It didn't. It just kept playing." He invited her in, and as she listened to him play, her recorder caught something more than notes. It caught the sound of truth, of time, of forgiveness. After she left, Ethan walked outside. The storm had calmed. The sea shimmered silver under the evening light. He sat on the porch, eyes on the horizon, and thought about everyone who had been part of his story. Mr. Howard, the janitor who saw potential in a boy no one else did. Mia, who believed when no one clapped, and even Lucas, whose cruelty had unknowingly lit the fire that shaped him. He realized then that none of it was really about revenge or victory. It was about becoming. That night, as the sun sank into the waves, he played one last time. Not for an audience, not for trophies, but for the simple joy of sound. The melody carried across the water, drifting toward the town, where the children paused their play to listen. It was soft, gentle, like a farewell that didn't feel sad. When the final note faded, Ethan closed the piano lid slowly and whispered, "Thank you." The next morning, the villagers found him sitting by the piano, head bowed peacefully, the instrument still humming faintly, like the air itself remembered his touch years later. They turned his home into a small music school, and in the corner the same piano still stood, worn, cracked, but eternal. A plaque above it read, "He was given a broken piano and taught the world how to listen, and when children pressed its keys, even the broken ones, they swore they could still hear him there, the sound of a boy who had once been mocked, now echoing through generations, reminding everyone that sometimes the most beautiful songs come from the hearts that refuse to stay silent."